by a show of hands, how many of you know a male that is struggling with infertility? Okay. And by a show of hands, how many of you know a female that is struggling with infertility? Okay. It's not surprising that more of you know a female than a male who is struggling. Why? Because, and I know this is going to be an absolutely shocking revelation, men don't talk about infertility. In 2007, after dating for 5 years and being engaged for 19 months, which was 19 months too long, my wife and I decided to get married. Almost immediately after we said our vows, the inevitable question arose. In truth, we just weren't ready, with our jobs and school being a priority. A couple years later, we began trying, but nothing came of it. Things like basal thermometers became part of our sexual activity. Spontaneity, that's not something that happens when there are right days and right times to consider. Romance? Passion? Yeah, that went out the window too. After a while, we got the test result that we wanted. We were overjoyed, but 11 weeks later, we lost our child. It was here that our infertility journey truly began. Up until this point, we knew we were struggling, but we were still in a time period before we could see a professional. Once we got into a fertility clinic, things moved very quickly. We went through a series of tests and procedures, accentuated by my taking a long walk down a little hallway, past a very nice nurse, going into that little room where guys do what we do, only for the lights to go out at the worst possible time. As we continued on our journey, we also dealt with our struggles individually. I was supportive of my wife, but I shut down on my side. I didn't talk about my fears and my sense of shortcoming. I became nearly robotic. It wasn't until I hit an ultimate low that I finally smartened up and admitted I need help. It was here that I began down a path that included antidepressants and counseling to, if not right the way I was feeling, at least find comfort and solace. Unfortunately, this admission is far too unique. Couples struggling with infertility rarely speak. The men in the relationships, less so. In particular, I found that men have trouble talking with other men about their struggles. My wife and I attended a support group, but men rarely came on a regular basis, and those who did rarely spoke. Even in social situations, we didn't talk about our journeys. One night, a group of couples got together for a night out on the town. At the end of the night, the women gathered on one side of the street. They talked about their procedures, injections, and the like. The guys, we basically gathered on the other side and talked about work and hockey. It's something that I actually don't find that uncommon. Nearly every conversation I've ever had with another guy has fallen into one of four categories. 1, entertainment and sports. 2, home renovations. 3, financial and jobs. Or 4, things our kids do. Now, the myth, of course, is that men don't talk. We do. It's just that a lot of our conversation is superficial. When you look at these topics, there aren't a lot of room for feelings. So you can imagine the trouble that I had talking about my infertility issues. It's kind of understandable, though, from the listener's perspective, when you consider how hard it is to be empathetic if you haven't gone through infertility yourself. Of course, though, my situation isn't that unique. 1 in 6 Canadian couples struggle with infertility. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of research done, about how men deal with their infertility struggles and accompanying mental health issues. As a result, there is no clear path for how a man can find his wellness. In reality, though, that road is as individual as the male is himself. I can certainly say, though, that my experience was not the norm. After being part of our infertility group for a number of months, I was asked to speak about my story on broadcast radio. I figured, sure, not a problem. I'd done numerous shows in the past. I'd be fine. The problem was, I'd never done something so personal, and I became nervous. Talking about things like sports or charitable causes I supported, not a problem. Something like infertility that enveloped my life, whole other animal. I ended up doing the show, but I did so anonymously. Funny thing though, in that anonymity, I found comfort. I was able to share my story, lift a huge burden off my shoulders. What also helped me though, was my nature of being a girls' guy. Though it's not a Wikipedia recognized term, girls' guys are those who have many female friends and as a result are exposed to talk about everything. And I mean everything. Women, much more than men, are open and frank about the issues going on in their lives. So what did this mean for me? The normally taboo topics that come with infertility struggle weren't that hard. So with that anonymity and that openness, I was able to move forward and tell my story. And I was able to go forward later on and share my story through television as myself, and I was able to share it on Facebook. Here's where a really interesting thing happened. Others began to share their stories too. Sure, I got the messages of support, the messages of comfort from my friends and family. But a funny thing happened as people started to share their stories as well. Whether they had gone through problems in the past or whether they were currently going through issues, they began to share, and suddenly that 1 in 6 statistic that seems so far away when you're isolated in your thoughts became that much more real. What I was also able to do was return to my wife and start to talk about my issues. I was able to express my fears, my feelings of shortcoming. And as a result, we were able to move further, stronger together. So how is it that you reach this point? It's really 2 pieces. First of all, recognize. Recognize when the male is ready to talk. This goes for both the men and the women in the relationship. It is so hard to look beyond ourselves to find our spot and to be able to listen, but it is so important to make that situation as comfortable as possible. The second piece, talk. Just talk, just let it out, fight that fear and move forward. Whether you're doing it anonymously through an online message board or you're doing it in person through a support group, it is so important to talk. It makes you feel so much better. Now, not every infertility story has a happy ending. Not every family has their baby. Fortunately, my story does. In October 2014, we were scheduled for IVF in Victoria, BC. All told, we were going to be out of town for a month. We packed up our house, our car, and our dog, and we traveled halfway across the country for the shot of a lifetime. I was ready. I had talked about my fears. I had talked about my shortcomings, and I was ready to take that next step. Driving through the Rocky Mountains was easy because I had already been down the most hellacious road of my life. And holding my baby daughter months later made this a story I had to share. Thank you very much.